All right, and I definitely want to set a record for diagnosis speed here because it's actually the coldest day of the year so far in Denver right now, so I really don't want to run this car with my garage door open any longer than necessary. So let me go ahead and get this set up real quick and I'll give you a look. Okay, I've got my Misfire counters up there, just started the car, and looks like we got a couple there on 8. Let's see, there's a couple more, so we would of course expect an 0308 at this point. Keep in mind that an 0300, you just need a couple of cylinders showing misfires. Let's see if we can induce this with a little more throttle activity. All right, well, I'm not totally impressed with our misfires here. There we go. There's a couple up there on 2. There's a couple on 8 and on 1. So we can see we are getting some random misfires here as I maybe induce it a little bit more. Okay, very good. Then there's another one over there at number 3. So, and also now at number 4. So what I was looking for is this is indicating that both banks are getting misfires. So I am going to expect that we're going to see probably intake manifold leak on both sides of the engine, or maybe not an intake manifold leak, although I do think it is going to be because I know with these plastic intake manifolds that's common. But it also could be an intake leak somewhere that would affect both banks. That's very obvious, but we'll see what happens. One of the other things I want to do too is let me go ahead and get some fuel trim up here. Okay, so what I've got is my long-term fuel trims here, and I just want to go ahead and do a quick test and see if I can find the source of the vacuum leak. Okay, and before I do that, I've got to remember the engine's cold, so let me make sure. Let's see if we've got a loop status here. There it is, loop status. That's in green, and at 0 I would expect that means the engine is still cold. So we'll have to wait for the oxygen sensors to start responding. Maybe I can just go ahead and bring those up. So we are just now in closed loop. I can do this either way. I can either use my oxygen sensors to detect rich condition that I'm going to induce with the propane. I think it'll be easier if I go to the fuel trims again, so let's do that. Okay, so we can see where our loop status went from 0 to 1. And we now see that our fuel trim has greatly increased, actually. It's about 20. Again, at idle, when I increase, it's going to drop. Yeah, that is most definitely going to be a vacuum leak. So let me go ahead and add propane around the hoses and intake. We'll see if we can get that fuel trim to drop. And I just heard an idle change right there. I definitely heard an idle change. I'm on bank 1 right now. Let's see if I can move over a little bit. Easier on bank 2 maybe. I definitely heard an idle change right there on bank 2. There we go. Look at that. Look at that. So I'm on bank 2, adding propane, and we see that I did hit a spot on the intake manifold. Let me show you where I'm at right here. Just adding propane directly around the intake manifold. Just right around. There we go. Just right around this area, around the intake manifold. And I can definitely get a response. All right, and just in that short period of time, a couple minutes there, the temperature in the garage is so cold I can see my breath again, so I'm glad to get a quick diagnosis there. But where I was going here was right between kind of around 2 and 4 along the upper intake manifold right there. And that is where I was looking. As we can see, there's no vacuum hoses there or anything. That is absolutely going to have to be an intake manifold leak. I thought I got a little bit of response over on number 1 as well. Around here, again, there are no other vacuum lines or anything that would indicate that it's anything but the intake manifold. But we're going to go ahead and do another thing here just to prove it conclusively, although that does. This car needs an intake manifold gasket. There is no question about it. With these plastic manifolds, you can tighten those bolts up all you want. All you're going to do is crack the manifold at best. You're not going to fix the problem. So what we're going to do now is a smoke test and validate 100%, although we kind of already did. Okay, and this I'm actually really just doing so that I can take a video of this and show confirmation to the customer, because the smoke coming out of the intake is going to make a lot more sense to him than those fuel trims. And I guess it also would for whatever shop looked and saw there was nothing wrong with the fuel trims or misdiagnosed any problem with the fuel trims. It said right there on the bill that they looked at fuel trims. I don't know how they missed a fuel trim at 24 that gets better under load. I'm not sure what to say about that, but like I said, I'm going to let that go. That's between them and the customer. I'm responsible for the truck now, and I believe I have a diagnosis that is correct. All right, so the first thing you got to do is we're going to have to block off the intake here. Wow, I hope I have a ring big enough to block that. All right, so my kit has one here that's way too small, and the next size up is way too big. So being the certified genius that I am, what I'm going to do is just go ahead and see if I can fit a rubber glove over the end of this and use that to seal up the intake. And of course, this part is just gratuitous for all the people that just have to see parts coming off and everything, as if you've never seen a man use pliers before, but there you go. And we've got our smoke there, so let's just go right in, and I guarantee I'm going to see it coming out of that 2 and 4 on bank 2 pretty quickly. Let's get some of this smoke out of here. Snook. Oh, check out my glove. It's coming to life. That's creepy, man. Let's see if we can get only the middle finger to pop up. That is so cool. Parts changers. All right, usually the smoke will show up a lot better with this special light. With the, oh my gosh, there is smoke absolutely billowing out from the intake. That is incredible. Let me see if I can make sure that you guys are seeing this, but it is just billowing out from everywhere on the right side of the engine. All right, most definitely you should be able to see that smoke billowing out right there. So what I'm going to do is turn the machine down a little bit, and I apologize if this doesn't show up on camera, but what I like to do is just try to create just a trickle. And I want to make sure, there is a ton of smoke still coming out of there, but I want to get the machine down to just a trickle, and if we look down in here, yeah, see that? We definitely are leaking. It's coming right from under that upper plenum. All right, while I'm at it, I'm over on bank 1 now, and this is a really good shot here. I know you can see the smoke, and that is emanating directly from the front corner of the intake manifold. So that is absolute confirmation. We've got leaks all over this intake manifold. All right, well, as you see, we've got some pretty definitive evidence that we've got correct diagnoses on both the 0300 and on the 0410 for the misfires in the air system, respectively. So what we're going to do now, I'm going to go ahead and replace the intake manifold gaskets. And of course, I won't show that stuff because my philosophy, if you are intelligent enough that you can understand how to do these diagnoses, you should be intelligent enough to know how to remove the bolts holding on parts on a car. So as soon as I finish that work, I will come back and we'll go ahead and run these same tests on the scan tool, look at the differences, and validate 100% we have a repair for the customer finally. All right, and one little tip here that I do on these plastic manifolds, and this is a 5.3 liter, and I've actually never seen one of these before, but it's still pretty much the same design. A lot of times these plastic intake manifolds, they really have some pretty sloppy specifications as far as flatness, and that's not unusual at all because the plastic certainly changes a lot, and I actually had to do a similar repair to this on my Trans Am a couple years ago. And what my recommendation is to upgrade to these. I think they're from Victor Rines, maybe Felpro makes them too, but these are steel gaskets, and the idea with this intake manifold gasket versus the plastic stock one, it's actually, for me at least, not so much the plastic versus the steel. I really couldn't care less about that. It's that on these upgraded gaskets, the gasket material here tends to be much, much thicker, and therefore it's a lot more forgiving to the sloppy tolerances that you often find with the intake manifold. So I've generally been using these for the last couple years, and I find them to be a significant stability increase so that you don't end up doing this repair again a year or two down the road. All right, it's do or die time. So I've got the intake manifold gasket replaced. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and turn the key on and off a couple times here to prime the fuel rail, since I had to remove it and empty the fuel out of it, and we'll see what happens. All right, took a second there. Let's go ahead and take a look here. The engine sounds much, much better. So normally this engine actually did start pretty much like that, but I knew that that was mostly because, you know, you've got the fuel rail needs to be primed, and also I've got all my throttle body cleaner and everything that's probably flooded the cylinders a little bit, but we can see no misfires. We're looking really good there. The engine definitely sounding better. What I want to do now is go over to fuel trim, and I think I've got that prepared here. And what we're going to see is we are still, I believe, in open loop, but I'm liking the negative short terms a little bit right now, although it's too early. Let's go over here to O2 sensors. And yeah, we are still in open loop, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold here until we go into closed loop. All right, still waiting there. I just want to go back and check and make sure that we still have no misfires right here. And still no misfires, so we're going to call that a fix. Let's go back here and wait for our short-term fuel trims. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and pause for a little bit, and we'll come back. Okay, so we just went into closed loop here. Let me go ahead and look at our data grid. Again, still no misfires. What we're going to do to prove the fix here is, now that we're in closed loop, I'm going to accelerate. And when we increase the RPM, instead of seeing the fuel trim decrease like we saw earlier, this is long-term fuel trim up here, short-term fuel trim down here. What we're going to see is I hope to see the fuel trim increase, indicating that we have a fix. What we will also see is with the increase in fuel trim here, we're also going to see, of course, a decrease in the short-term fuel trim to negate the high long-term fuel trim, and eventually, of course, that would stable out. So let's go ahead and do that and see if it happens. Okay, and I like that. All right, so we've got a slight increase in fuel trim and a proportionate decrease in the short term. So were I to run that enough at that RPM in that particular block, we would eventually stabilize that long term out. So I can take the vehicle out for a drive a little bit, except it is snowing like a bitch right now, and I kind of don't want to take responsibility for that right now. But we have a definite fix here. First of all, if nothing else, our long-term fuel trim is no longer hanging around 22 when I'm at idle. The misfires are down here. We have not had any misfires at all. And most importantly, none when the engine was cold. I can tell you when the engine is cold, that misfire counter would go absolutely nuts on a 4-hour rest like that. So we are going to call this a fix. We are good to go. Now, there was one last thing. When I was looking at the check engine codes, I did forget to mention one other one, an EGR code. And that actually, I didn't necessarily forget about that. This car has an EGR valve that does not open, and I already diagnosed that in the field. That, of course, would not cause any of the drivability or misfire problems with a non-opening EGR. A non-closing certainly would. But we will cover that in another video because we haven't talked about EGR, and that'll be a good one for the Diagnosis and Understanding series. So I will go ahead and call this a fix and get the customer his car back, and we will see you next time. Thanks for watching.